everybody, and welcome to the Community Commons Changemakers session. Women who are making change across the globe. So great to have everyone. Ann Usher is here, our change-making guide for the day, and she is a Global 50 Women in Sustainability awardee from 2023, and we're going to learn a little bit more about her background when she shares that. But before that, let's have everyone kind of tell us a little bit about you and then what you might be driving change on for Earth Month. Not that we shouldn't be driving change at all times, but what in particular might you be working on for the next month? Carrie, let's start with you.
So hi, I'm Carrie Carfagno. I am an associate professor at Georgetown University. I have a dual appointment in the business school, McDonough School of Business, and the Earth Commons, which is the science and graduate school. And I am the program director for our master's program in environment and sustainability management. And so that program is a 50-50 split of half business, half science, hopefully, obviously, to change the world. So my biggest thing I try and do is have about 50 to 55 students come out of our program. It's a one-year intense program, full-time, with the ability to change the world. So I'm just hoping that I'm a facilitator for them. I also teach their capstone and their leadership course. So I'll be taking notes today as Ann talks.
That's great. Millie?
Hi, sorry I can't have video on right now, but I am a recently retired engineer. Retired in 2021, trying to dedicate my life to stewardship of the earth and rewilding. I'm connected to a lot of nonprofits in Arizona and also in Washington, where my husband and I summer. And we're just trying to connect a lot of dots. Our passions are gardening and native plants, composting. Sorry for the wind chimes behind me. Like I said, rewilding, trying to create habitat, water harvesting. And so my focus for this month actually is a group that I'm in, an HOA task force, trying to convince HOAs in the area to conserve and harvest water more.
That's fantastic. Great list of things, Millie. And Millie's down in Tucson. Okay. The thing that I'm focusing on, and it's how I got to meet Millie at Environment Day at the Capitol, is working on advancing a composting initiative through the state of Arizona to reduce methane. I got turned on I went through Seth Godin's Alt MBA, and then I got to be part of this kind of thing, the Carbon Almanac. And what really spoke to me in it was composting and as a way to deal with heat, specific to Arizona, and water usage. So I'm actually going to be bringing in, and Millie's been super helpful in building a list. We're going to be co-hosting an expert on composting, and we're going to invite just policy leaders at all levels of government within the state, and then folks like me and Millie will be hanging on and looking at who we can keep accountable and looking for what resonates and what doesn't, and how we can be of influence, and hopefully next year get some legislation heard in the legislature. So yeah, that's what I'll be working on next month, because we're hosting it early May, which is International Composting Awareness Week. So that's me. And Ann, tell us about you.
Thanks. So again, just a huge thanks for reaching out, and so fantastic to learn. Well, first of all, just to meet you guys. In a way, it's nice, even if it's a small group, it's nice. It's a chance to know more about it. You get a chance to know you guys a bit more instead of just a huge group. So thank you. And especially Rhonda, you mentioned just in our messages between each other, you had some really interesting women speak to this group. Wow. And so I'm really impressed. So big changes. I should say right off the bat, really, I I would say I'm still in the midst of this big change. So I'm still, I got into this field about a decade ago, but I really do feel that I'm still working my way into this new career in the sense that I'm still looking for ways to really apply what I've learned in the last decade. So, so going back, I was a journalist for 15 years. I got into that because in part because I grew up in Singapore. So much of my life has been spent overseas. Um, I was a little kid, and I was through my parents. I was incredibly fortunate to have traveled all over Asia, and then a little bit of Africa, for about 5 years. And so and not just traveled around, but just my parents being who they were, especially my mom, it was really off the beaten path. So I was just really immersed into different cultures, and I knew, as I started to say earlier, I knew even at age 12 that I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. So I love to write. I had a grandfather who got us Nat Geo subscriptions. I would immerse myself in those, and I became aware really young age that, wow, okay, there are some women out there doing incredible, taking photos for Nat Geo or writing. I learned early on, okay, I'm pretty decent at writing. Anyway, I became aware of correspondents at the New York Times, such as Barbara Cressette. And I'm like, my God, you can actually do that. And so then when we left Singapore, we moved back to Connecticut, and very extremely waspy. I'm not going to give you my whole life story, but there's a reason why I'm saying that. Just very waspy. It's a lovely little town, but anyway. And I remember kids there say, meeting me. I say, Singapore, where is that? Is that in China or near China? And I have to explain it. Can you imagine like a little 12 or 13-year-old? No, it's a little island off the tip of Malaysia. What's Malaysia? So basically the combination was, I'm like, no, really, I can't. I want to be a journalist partly because I want to, I don't know if I can, but I want to try to explain what I know about the rest of the world and learn more about the rest of the world, and keep exploring. So in college, I did a dual track in journalism and international relations, weirdly at Miami University of Ohio. But I was able through that, I did it partly because Miami has an amazing program in Luxembourg. So I did a year there, did a European area studies minor, but it was in French that I basically never used. But anyway, so I went, then journalism, I went immediately to DC after I graduated, I got a master's in journalism. This is just in the world we live in now, it sounds crazy. At the time, it was a master's in print international journalism. So newspapers. Anyway, so I was lucky in that I got married incredibly young. I was married at 23. My husband, we're a small group, I can say this, CIA, in a capacity where I can say that. And so we went off immediately to Tokyo. And again, I want to talk mostly climate, not journalism, but I was incredibly lucky. I studied Japanese. I knew and before we got married, I was thinking about, the time that was when Bosnia and Croatia were erupting. I had maps of the region. I was going to head straight there. And then he got this assignment. So, okay, Asia, but at least I actually had been in Japan before, so I learned Japanese. I just, absolutely threw myself all in. I won't say strong basic Japanese. I was not fluent. But anyway, so I worked for the National Wire Service for about a year. Was able to cover the Olympics through that. More importantly, I ended up freelancing for about a year, and I was able to do a couple of things that I'm still a bit proud of. I did some undercover reporting on the Chinese border with North Korea, covering refugees that were streaming in. I was able to break some news on that front. I went back a second time and broke some news on labor camps in North Korea. anyways, and then worked for, through that work, I was able to become the Tokyo correspondent for Major Wire Service for about a year. So anyway, so then his assignment ran up. We're back in DC. Long story short, I went on to, again, I was incredibly lucky. I ended up doing reporting, but also editing. My longest stint as a journalist was for about in one place. I worked as the evening editor for a major Washington bureau for about 5 years. And then when my now ex-husband got a job in Tel Aviv, that's where I ended my career. A lot of Washington news bureaus were shuttering around that time, which was incredibly, I was in Tel Aviv sort of watching that from afar and thinking, oh my God, is that it? And then so anyway, I did some last reporting, it's more freelance assignments, Christian Science Monitor, Sydney Morning Herald, threw myself out in the West Bank. Side note, really hard to watch what's going on right now. Anyway, and then I returned so when I returned to the US, the bureau was closed. And so that really sparked a lot. I was going through a rough time with my husband, and within a year we divorced. It was more my idea. And so I didn't do this on purpose, but in the space of a year, it really was the equivalent of the classics. You see the waiter taking the, the tablecloth and just doing that, and pieces flying everywhere. And anyway, I just took a really hard look at what I was the most passionate about, and there had been some inner tension in myself for a while about, it's one thing to go out and cover something. It's quite another thing to really go all in on a subject, take away the byline and I was a really old school reporter, so I couldn't, I was not an advocate, none of this chit chat, by the book. And so I couldn't advocate, like, okay, well, no, in my case, as I was saying earlier to Rhonda, it was surprising. A lot of people end up going into working for environmental groups. So in my case, and I'm still looking for the best way to do this, to use my international relations, academic and professional background, policy experience, knowledge, and combine that with environment and climate change. And at the time, I learned really fast, like, okay, well, yes, I do have a lot of policy knowledge, and you cannot go out and just run around and try to be a climate person without, you need the science too, obviously. And so or boots on the ground. And one of my friends in DC at the time, so, you really, I spent a lot of time overseas, but, in this realm, you need your boots on the ground time. And so long story short, this is going to sound a little crazy, but I literally ended up throwing everything in storage and grabbed 2 suitcases and did an initial sort of scouting trip and went back to Southeast Asia. And I did a trip to Jakarta, Manila, and where else? Bangkok, and reconnected with people. And within 3 weeks fortunately, able, just through a Skype conversation, was able to find work in Sumatra, and went back, cemented things in storage, flew back with my 2 suitcases to Indonesia. And I ended up working for 8 months for a tiny NGO run by some really tough. When people think environmental NGOs, sometimes I think they think, whatever, fluffy, la la la, save some little species in a forest. No, I want to imagine like the most tough, hard-bitten, literally chain smoking, swearing Brits and some Aussies and a Kiwi, people you can't imagine. And they were literally trying to save it's one of the largest in sort of half intact rainforest left on Earth that happens to be in Sumatra, Indonesia, and they were trying to save it from palm oil companies at the time, and who were just, and when people talk about that, I can say now from bearing witness, we're literally clearing, football fields an hour, just massive swaths of land,
Which is just crazy.
yeah, really. And so I try to, long story short, I did some investigations for them for over 8 months. I ended up getting, I was fortunate, I got a State Department honorarium to help train Indonesian journalists in how to conduct environmental investigations. I ended up doing some of my own investigations. I tripped across this. Basically tripped across illegal gold mining that was going on in these rainforests across Indonesia. And I flew myself out with a photographer. I became very close with, just friends, out to Borneo. I went completely, per being a kid, off the beaten path into some areas were frankly really dangerous, and documented that. And I ended up sort of luring me back journalism, writing a story for AFP and another for Manga Bay about what was going on. And with that,
I was just gonna say, wouldn't something like Manga Bay attract you? I mean,
Yes.
there's some really great
Yeah.
publications.
Yeah, and I know Rhett it's sort of really quite well. So yeah, no, it did. But it's still, and on the one hand, it was great to do that work, but it, even after doing it, I was like, it's still journalism. I really felt this, I want to go all in, and I want to try to work for policy change. So and after 8 months, it was untenuous financially. I was being paid, next to nothing. And I literally at one point my laptop was stolen. I had, the Indonesian government hack me. I had some really crazy things happen. And so anyway, I ended up flying back to the US. Long story short, ended up working for applying my skills as a journalist still, worked for USAID on contract as its lead climate writer for a couple years. That weirdly ended up taking me back to Indonesia at one point. My job was basically to describe how the agency was working with other countries, 49 countries around the world at the time, to help them cut their GHG emissions and adapt to climate change. So I was writing and interviewing officers and out in the field, but at the same time, as you can imagine, I was extremely grateful because I was learning a tremendous amount, gaining these learning, best practices, what exactly they were doing with these governments, all kinds of technical training at the same time. They put me through an officer's training course on climate change. So now I was okay. Well, now I'm writing, but I'm finally starting to get the science, beyond the top line stuff. I'm like, okay, I'm now working down the layers a little bit. I ended up then working for 4 years for the Pew Charitable Trust in DC. I was hired as an editorial officer, and they thankfully assigned me to 6 of their major environmental projects. And through that job, that really exposed me to on a very sophisticated level. I was like, okay, that was government to government with USA. Now we're talking, how do you run a really serious multi-million-dollar campaign to try to achieve massive change? And in their case, for instance, I was assigned to a project that's literally trying to create a connected MPA network around Antarctica. I was assigned to, the ones I'm most grateful for was being able to work for 4 years with its flood prepared communities team, which is absolutely first rate. I think it's absolutely stupid. They just recently archived that project, and it was doing amazing work with all these cities across the, let's see, East Coast, Charleston, working with governors, mayors, communities that are being repeatedly flooded now, sea level rise, stronger storms, and giving them just, here's the toolbook. Here's, do this, policy tools, practical tools. Anyway, but just through, again, it was a lot of on the job training. And then the pandemic hit. And just to bring you up to where I am now, I had one of these life moments. I'm like, okay, well, I actually made the decision right before it hit. And then I like, oh God, do I stick with this? Do I now God knows what's going to happen for the rest of the world for how long. And I basically decided, okay, if I really want to go all in, because I was learning and I was editing these massive reports, but I wasn't doing the work. And so I thought, okay, well, I started a graduate certificate in natural resource management through Virginia Tech, through a Center was it Center for Global, Center for Leadership and Global Sustainability. And so I moved out here, worked with a partner on a marine oriented nonprofit, but then threw myself into getting my master's degree. And it took, basically for the last 3 years, it's been a mix of working in the field now and wrapping that degree and doing additional training. So since moving here, this is going to sound insane. I was able to work with this really big NOAA flood modeling network, by coastal of the Gulf. It was like a huge workshop, and through that, that was more on the job training about flood threats, threat preparedness, coastal erosion, all these things. I also happened to, so just one last thing to mention, I also happened to learn weirdly a lot about seaweed, and specifically about how seaweed and other, how types of seaweed just act as sponges, soaking up massive amounts of carbon dioxide as they grow. Photosynthesis 101. And through that, I ended up at one point 2 years ago spearheading a project to try to regenerate giant kelp on 5 acres here in La Jolla, about a mile from where I am right now. We came really close. We needed $2.9 million to do that. Didn't get the funding through Deutsche Bank, and I had a limited amount of time. I basically had 8 months to try to go for it. But through that, I've had a series of things, and one thing leads into another. So through that, I was looking, this is going to sound nuts. Basically, part of the idea was to harvest half the seaweed and use it for sustainable products. So my degree, it wasn't just on climate change and natural resource management. My master's is in basically all things global sustainability, every facet you can think of related to that. So I started thinking about, you're harvesting this, it's vacuuming up CO2. What kind of products, if any, how can I use it on the back end? So I started investigating things. I ended up spreading an effort, just to bring this quickly. I ended up trying to, speaking of methane, I was investigating whether you could use certain seaweed species to lower methane emissions from livestock, dairy cows, other livestock. Learned a lot, learned that you can't do that with giant kelp, but I discovered some species that you could do it with. I ended up trying to spearhead an initiative with the California Air Resources Bureau to do a pilot project to test the most promising feeds that are being developed using seaweed species to lower methane emissions. I got them thinking about it. I did a lot of work with dairy cow folks, learned some of their hesitations. Ended up, because I was learning about different species and what they could do and not do, I ended up tripping across a guy, this is really going to sound crazy, a guy in Malaysia who's been developing bioplastics using a tropical red seaweed species grown it's been farmed massive volumes off the coast of Malaysia for years for other purposes. He created a pretty viable bioplastic out of that. I ended up introducing him to Gore, as in Gore-Tex, Gore Materials. They ran tests on it. It's determined it's not quite strong enough for their uses, but other people could. That led me into other people. So all of a sudden, I'm now in the bioplastics field. I'm in the seaweed field. I'm my hands on all these different projects. And then I was, at the same time, I ended up working, gave some professional advice on coastal climate adaptation projects here in San Diego, worked briefly for a county supervisor as her environment land use advisor. That's a long story. It didn't last too long. having to do with a supervisor. Anyway, and then recently, through professional memberships, I've just in the last year, I've started working for someone who's become a close friend using my knowledge of coastal. I also got a certificate in, I should mention quickly, I'm now a certified coastal practitioner. So I went back to school yet again, and took a lot of training, 10, 12 courses through the Coastal Zone Foundation so that I could really become an expert in climate adaptation for coastal regions. So I did that. I'm working towards a degree, and getting my diploma in GHG management through another institute, the climate-based fellowship that I mentioned to you guys. So basically, I've spent 3 years of being in school and trying to find ways to apply it. Was shocked, I'll be honest, to get that recognition last year. That really surprised me. I don't even know how they found me in some of the projects I've been working on. And then recently was fortunate there. I did some work in Puerto Rico with it was actually it was a group that was wrapping up the US government's post Hurricane Maria efforts to make the island more economically resilient. And of course, there's a climate angle to that as well. So through them, I met the guy I'm now I'm partnering with him, but we still need to get more traction. Anyway, it's the International Sustainable Resilience Center based in New Orleans. And so we are looking for, it's an amazing team, people who have way more experience than I do. But now that I know how to downscale climate, all kinds of climate models, and I've done GIS and I've done all kinds of things. So now people that have been in the field much longer and have worked in disaster resilience, there are now 10 to 12 of us, and we're looking for projects now to apply those skills to be able to, do vulnerability assessments and downscale things and everything else. So long story short, it's been some really, really massive career and life change.
I don't know about anybody else, but I'm exhausted.
It hasn't been easy. I'm sorry, what?
I said, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm exhausted. It sounds like you've been learning and traveling and doing like every inch of every day. It's great to have Elaine and Holly here. They're both here in Arizona as well. So thanks for joining us, ladies. So with all of that, Anne, I mean, and I just want to open it up to any questions, but with all of that, where did you see the best change making happen, and why was the ability to drive change in that project, that moment, that place possible?
God, it's there one it's not, God, there are 2 things. I'd say one on the bioplastics end, which again, I know we're talking climate change and this is, what bioplastics. I got drawn to bioplastics in part, I should back up for a second, saying one of the projects I worked on while I was at Pew for 4 years was its Preventing Ocean Plastics project, another multi-million-dollar global initiative by Pew. And so I was learning a lot. I edited this massive report on plastic pollution. When I first moved here, I worked with a guy to help him refocus his marine nonprofit on plastic pollution. So I knew a lot about the subject. When I learned, when I tripped across the guy in Malaysia, when I learned, about the potential, not just for, using seaweed, but all these other technologies that have just been developed in the last 5 years to essentially to replace plastic. And then when I learned about the massive GHG emissions associated with the whole life cycle of plastics, when they're created, end of use, all of that, and the impact. So that, in terms of driving change, I really know some of it has been on my end. I'd say I've been lucky with some of the things I'm now spearheading without getting too into, I'm working with a couple other innovators now on that end. And for me, some of it was, honestly, tapping into, first of all, it's a subject that I'm extremely passionate about, not just knowledgeable through Pew and research, but just, you know, I'm a coastal person, I'm a marine person, I'm a scuba diver. I can't stand, you know, what's going on with, you know, I can't stand the impacts of microplastics in the environment, and not just in the ocean, of course, but on land as well. So that's, but in terms of driving change, it was being able to tap into, as a journalist, I was used to 15 years just reaching out absolutely cold to people all over the world, especially as a journalist in Washington on some of the subjects that I was working on. And being, you know, I have no, it's not that I'm not, you know, I spent months and months and months investigating the subjects as a reporter and an editor. And so for me, it's driving change is combining the, okay, I'm very passionate about this subject. And then my training also through my master's degree, which was a lot of it was really, you know, it was systems thinking, systems change. How do you affect system change? And it's literally taking an issue. And for me, whatever it is that I'm working on, just trying to dissect it, see, you know, 360, what's the big picture? What are the drivers? How do you affect change? Policy change, otherwise, you know, knowledge of, you know, state, local, national, international policy. And in my case, being able to then look, you know, just, I can't tell you how much research I've done literally just through Google, LinkedIn, otherwise, you know, and just reading and reading and reading, you know, what are the most promising technologies out there? And honestly, on this end of things, when I received that award last year, of course, initially, I literally, I said, I don't deserve this. There are other people in the field who've achieved a lot more than I have. I'm relatively new in this field. And they said, okay, fine. Maybe I was number 50 out of you were searching for. So anyway, but it gave me an opportunity. Part of in receiving the award, they asked me to write a think piece. And I said, okay, I don't think plastics have gotten enough attention in the climate space in general. And so I used it as an excuse to refocus. I was working on a bunch of different things, but to refocus and reach out, just having this platform to reach out. I reached out to MIT, I reached out to Harvard, I reached out to every innovation center I knew of, and back to my, you know, people I've been working with anyway in this field. And you know, through that, not only did I learn yet more about some of the best innovations happening in that area now, but I made some connection. I was able to synthesize my findings and say, okay, this, and this, these are, I think these are some of the most promising innovations out there. And then I reached out to them, and I literally, again, I had the conversations with some of these scientists. It gave me an excuse. And then during the article and after, I was to say, okay, can I connect you with so-and-so? Is there a way I can help? You know, I've been looking ever since for those opportunities. And I'm literally now going to, you know, coming full circle. I'm going to be speaking to Coca-Cola next week, one of my least favorite, you know, multinationals, because I now, you know, through a bunch of contacts and writing about this, I'm going to introduce them to an innovator who I think has a really promising solution.
So I'm going to take the liberty as a former journalist and ask that follow-up question and then open it up. I'm hearing about, you know, all these things that you've been doing and all these things that you've been learning, but what is the one person or the one thing that you've seen or that you've experienced or you've done yourself that drove change? It's like, oh, this worked, therefore there's a lot to sort of pull on from that experience. Can you narrow that down? And if you don't have it, that's fine. I mean,
honestly, connecting people to an idea, a solution.
okay, which is hugely important.
So for instance, and in one case, it still hasn't happened yet, but for instance, on the cows methane issue, I was able to connect a top scientist at UC Davis with the executive director of a dairy ag group, lobbying group, basically an industry group, and connect that and then triangulate it with CARB, the California Air Resources Board, and get that conversation going. because there were
Awesome.
pilots going on in other states. And I said, my God, and I didn't know this before I moved out. California happens to be the biggest dairy state in the union. And why are we not? Everyone thinks the Midwest. Why are we not doing this? Just ask, and some of it is just as journalists and me asking those probing questions. And again, training journalism, but also through my degree and work since then, and just trying to connect those dots and put people together. And I've also done that in the bioplastics arena with the Environmental Defense Fund, the company in Malaysia, and other people. ADF is spearheading a massive plastics initiative, a global one. Hey, have you heard about this? Have you heard about this? Just, and then, and frankly, a lot of it is, I feel like I'm helping to move the dial by connecting people and threads. Unfortunately, a lot of the work I've done in the last 3 years has been unpaid. Those connections, I haven't been paid for that work. I've been on the phone. I've been
I
linking.
feel ya.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I love doing that. It
That's-
is what we do. Let's open it up. Millie, go ahead. Why don't you ask Anne a question, or anybody a question, really?
Yeah, I have so many questions, and I'm so happy to hear someone who has such a vast and diverse experience who is talking about the systems problem that we have, because it's hard for individuals, even individuals like myself and my husband who try to dedicate our lives to helping this. We don't have that outreach that you do, to feel like we're making a difference. The dots we connect are much more localized than the ones you're talking about. But I have a question about that. I have a couple. One is, it seems like humans sometimes only can absorb things, especially when they're new, if they're simplified.
Yeah.
But the problem that we have with climate change and the human influence on planet Earth is that we have negatively touched it in so many ways. And you went through a whole bunch of them. The plastic issue. You may have heard of the Wash Ashore effort. There's a, it's a group that is trying to harvest plastic off of beaches. I don't know if it's just the USA or everywhere. And they actually make huge sculptures out of it. The Botanical Garden here in Tucson has been hosting one of their many sculpture shows for the last few months. It's going to be here through June. And it is, it's horrifying in one sense, because I mean, they make these beautiful sculptures of whale tails and puffins that are, 15 feet tall, jellyfish hanging from the ceiling that are 14 feet long. And if you go to their website, you can see it. But then you think about the tiny amount of plastic that actually made up those humongous sculptures. And they're about educating the public. I can't tell you how many little beach toys that you saw. There's flip-flops. They even make a game out of it on their signage. They say, try to find 10 flip-flops and 4 pieces of tire and 3 beach combs and whatever. Anyways, I better get back to my question. But you go to the plastic, and then like you were speaking to, it's really, we've got to replace plastic. We've got to build plastic out of something else, which I think is what you were talking about with bioplastic. With soil, there are so many things we can do. That's why I'm passionate about Rhonda's composting effort. It's really not rocket science, and I was sort of a rocket scientist, to compost your food scraps and create this amazing soil that you don't have to buy in a plastic bag from Home Depot or whatever. But it's, it's all connected. But I feel like people get overwhelmed easily. Even if they go to just the Washed Ashore display, for instance, they don't get how that's connected to the health of the shorelines and to soil and all the microplastics being found in people's bloodstreams now, causing heart failure and just everything. So my question is, how do you approach explaining to people the enormity of the system's problem? Maybe you don't call it an enormity. How do you reach people without oversimplifying? Maybe that's my question.
But that is such a good question. And that's something I wrestle with so much. In fact, it's something, that was literally a big piece of one of the classes I took at Virginia Tech. That's how you know, climate change, sustainability, all these, as you said, it is so interwoven, and people often don't see all those threads and how things, Earth systems, how all these things intersect and connect. And so in my case, it's trying to, in outreach and in out, all kinds of outreach, whether it's at a meeting or writing something up, trying to break it's using journalism, breaking things down. I first try to make an impact, to back up a second, I think in the sustainability field, to make an impact. I think it helps to start with where people are. So if I'm in front of an audience, to whoever that audience is, meet people where they are, B, tailor your message, C, approach first, start with what's most relevant to them and their lives and what they care about. Show the financial impact, those kinds of things. If you don't, you have to make the issue real for them. And if you don't, you'll just lose them. You can't, I don't,
Right.
I really don't do technical speak when I, in the past decade in general, because you'll lose people.
You'll lose people.
Yeah. But showing, you have to, not enough to say, to broad statement, like I just said, oh, everything's, just think of it, you have to approach it as a systems thinker. No, you have to literally, I show those threads with examples and tangible examples and costs. If you talk about like coastal erosion, all the there are a million drivers, sea level rise, right? All these things. And it's a massive thing. And how can I make a difference? Well, break down the local, bring it down to earth. I start, as you guys are doing locally, start local,
Well, and I would say,
like, go ahead. Others,
I guess I would say, like, if you just use the plastic issue, it's a health issue. So it's like, if you care about your health, especially like, let's just take Arizona for an example. If you drink out of a plastic bottle, it breaks down in the heat and it gives off even more microplastics. So you're not just drinking water. You think that you're solving your thirst problem. You're actually causing health issues for you. And then when you have health issues, the planet has health issues. And then just walking around with the statistic of how many gallons of water it takes to make a plastic bottle, I think is, provocative. I don't know that off the top of my head, but I do know it takes 600 gallons of water to make a typical hamburger with the bun and the cheese, the lettuce and tomato and whatever. I used that with a legislator recently, so to really think, and then we're just throwing it away. So that means you literally threw away 600 gallons of water, because it's not just about what it gets sprayed with when it goes into a landfill, but it's what it took to, start it. So I think, as Anna's saying, it's making it super relatable. Like, what do you care about? If you care about your health, and some people literally don't. I have a woman, she drinks out of a plastic bottle and she just doesn't care. And she's really smart, like multiple degree smart.
Yeah,
So
I know a lot of those people,
Yeah.
and trying to get them to care is like an uphill battle. I guess one more quick follow-up, if I could. I know there's other people, but do you find, and this probably might not have an answer, it's probably both, but do you find that you gain more power or more influence, more ability to influence people as individuals, or influencing policy? Where have you had more success?
My personal opinion, I try to where I can gently and as diplomatically as I possibly can, I'll sometimes just say, point things out to people on an individual level. But I do believe that the biggest difference you can make on especially on climate change is policy and of course companies, which is why I'm, as much as I'm driven, I think I personally can use my skills and background the most in the policy arena. But ultimately, that's more the work I want to focus on. But having said that, in terms of, who's putting up the GHGs, right? Yeah, where is that, who's, yes, all of us in our cars, but it's not just all of us in our cars, is companies and plastics. It is Coke. That is a company I'll be speaking of this week.
absolutely.
You have to, you can't just, what I've learned is you can't, that's why I love groups like, what is it? CI, Conservation International, WRI, the major global nonprofits, and their entire not the entire, but a huge focus for them has been on trying to work with companies. Project Drawdown is another amazing group, and they have one of their they spend a lot of their focus working on engaging companies. And I think it, just stepping back for just a second, I think going back to your first question, in terms of affecting change, there is a lot of climate doomerism out there. If you're in the space in the way that I am, and you go on, I'm on climate Twitter, so to speak. I'm connected to, I can't tell you how many climate scientists, and that's one of the many ways I monitor developments and different things. And my God, there are some people with which one guy has, I think, 70,000 followers, and every single tweet is doom and gloom in the planet. And I don't want to say it. I can tell you through my master's degree and the additional training that I've received, it's not good. The trend, our trajectory, and the tipping points. And I have a whole, and I'm not going to, and I don't want to, but I know how close we are to major tipping points, and what that means. And it's really ugly. But I also know I try to remain optimistic, and that's why I weirdly working in things as diverse as, what can you do with seaweed and regenerate it, and how do we use the ocean to help draw down emissions, all these other things, and try to engage on these innovations, because for me, it's one way. At first, it just keeps my energy up, but it's just a way of, if you can show. I was at an innovations pitch earlier this week with major people who actually, unlike me, have real money to invest. And there are a lot of startups we can say, okay, well, here's one way you can affect change. This technology, this is what they're trying to replace plastics, or they're trying to do this with soil. And some of these, biostimulants is another thing I've got to know a lot about in the last couple of years, weirdly. And that means plant growth serums, some of them made out of seaweed and stuff, but that actually weirdly act as natural pesticides and fungicides. And as you grow them, these are carbon sinks as you grow them. I mean, there's some wild, very, very cool innovations out there. And of course, you want to make a real difference, you have to apply many of these back to policy. Yeah, policy regulations will make the biggest difference. But even as you approach policies, is don't just, okay, it's all gloom and doom, but that's why I love the most poorly labeled piece of legislation on the planet, the IRA. Well, a lot of that money is going to do some amazing things. And that's when you talk to locals and locals, talk about, it's funding jobs in this space. And that's the kind of stuff you can drive, all these great, all of that. So sorry, that's a mouthful.
No, thank you.
I have a couple thoughts related to that, but Elaine, did you want to share anything or ask a question? She might not.
There I am. Okay, sorry.
It's okay.
I wanted to mute myself too, because the oven timer keeps going on and off, and I thought that would be a little distracting for you guys. And I didn't put my video on because I'm sitting here in my apron, and I figured, what if somebody watches this afterwards? Forget it.
Elaine, that was me in a meeting earlier. I did not have my face. I had an image because my hair
Yeah, I mean,
my
it's
head.
a nice, it's actually a nice apron. I bought it in Paris, but still, the face doesn't, anyway. I was, while you were talking about all this stuff, and I do whatever I can to try to make a difference, and, listening to you, and I'm sorry I came in late. I think, well, when you mentioned, somebody mentioned composting, so I went onto my city's website about composting. In Canada, where I lived before I moved to the US, the city I lived in had a composting program, and it wasn't optional. I mean, you gave a container to every resident in every home and every apartment, and it's a container that sat on the countertop, and you just scraped your eggshells and your peelings in there. And then I think actually the city picked them up because not everybody had a garden, right?
Right.
And it just made me think that, I think a lot of it, when you said a lot of it is policy,
Yeah.
it has to be easy. Like when I looked at it, said, okay, for $5, we'll give you a composting container. You can put, it's recycled garbage container, goes in your backyard. And, okay, but how am I going to get all the crap from the kitchen sink all the way out there, especially when
That's
it's
pro tip.
110, it's 110. And then we have to worry about the smell
Yeah.
and all.
Yeah.
I just think governments, and it really boils down a lot to the local level, to the municipal governments, because they're the ones that set these policies and practices at the local level. It
Yep.
has to be freaking easy. And if
It's not that easy, but
they're
Elaine,
not
I'm
going to
working
do
on
it.
it. Yeah.
What'd you say, Rhonda?
I'm actually working on it. In fact,
Are
I'll
you?
invite, Elaine is one of my board members at Earth Gives. So, gotten to know her. I haven't known her very well, but, we both now live in Arizona, both Canadians. So, I'm working on getting legislation, and we're bringing, as I told the women earlier, we're bringing a guest speaker, an expert on composting, to talk to all the sort of elected and governance and policymaker officials at every level of government in Arizona. Because I've talked to the governor's office of resiliency and city waste management types and all of that. So we're doing that for sure. And I'll share more with you on that. But there's also national legislation that I found out that came out of a, believe it or not, bipartisan legislation out of the Senate to set up an recycling and composting infrastructure throughout the United States, which is amazing. So it was Senator Bozeman, Capito, and Carper. And so I went and met with our senators, Sinema and Kelly, to talk, hey, there's this legislation in the Senate. Is there an opportunity, especially because composting being the heat mitigation? But I will tell you, the city of Phoenix even had their math wrong. They were doing the math based on 100 years versus with methane, it's 20 years. And then that shows it's 80 times the heat trapping. So
great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Super.
We're going to have to move back to Canada, Rhonda. It's going to be too hot in the United States.
Well, but look, we had all the wildfires, and I don't, it's like, I'm not sure
Canada's had wildfire. The whole thing is, I hate to say this, it's a big mess. I mean, I'm so glad that people like Anne are doing something and studying and going after it. Like, I'm past my working years, so all I can do is support what's happening and spread the news as much as I can and work towards a better outcome for the next generation. But like I said, maybe it's a messaging thing at government levels and a messaging thing all around. If it's not easy, they're not doing it.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to follow up on Millie's question, because, I've spent, just like Elaine has, most of my life in communication and messaging. And according to the research, when it comes to the environment, it's because it's a very complicated issue.
Sure.
And what is also clear is that the legislature, even if you said, if you invest in this, it'll save all this money, they don't care. Because, Anne, I'm guessing when you did work for the supervisor, as I've worked for different lawmakers or like coached candidates and whatnot, it's really not about the cost savings at the end of the day. If they're not on the side of climate, they don't care. It's really more about how they're going to look. It's really more about what they're going to own, what messaging that they can make hay of it. So when we were pitching the composting idea to a very right leaning, she's got her hands and grip on all the water in Arizona and stuff can't even get out of committee. Well, she's a realtor. And so what I did is I came in from a perspective of, if we really continue to lose water, the value of our homes are going to go down.
Yeah, nobody's going to buy homes here and move here.
Exactly. So you have to do the research to figure out what moves them. And that's what you said. It's like meet them where they're at. Well, that means understanding your audience, understanding the person you're talking to, and listening and trying to pick up cues and kind of, pull those things back. So in the world of Anne, I've done probably way more pitching than I've done journalism now in my life. So it's kind of like you pitch the story and then it's like, well, that's not being bit. So it's like I'm pitching, well, what about this? Or what about this angle? Or what do you, kind of like, what are you looking for? And helping people find that. And I think the same thing, Millie, goes to how do we talk to people? It's not about what we want to say. It's about where are they? And asking questions and better understanding them and then coming in. Even when I've done canvassing door to door, you ask the question, so as former reporters and it's like we're used to asking questions. So
in line with that, Rhonda, I think I agree with you totally. And the only challenge in the climate environment today in this country is climate denial and the polarization in our political system that really pits people who believe in science and those who deny it. And that's the bottom line. I mean, changing minds and asking questions, and if they're ingrained in this political abyss of denial, there's no way that they're going to do it because they won't get votes, because they won't be liked, because it's like such a mess. And I mean, I don't know, Anne, how do you even address that?
So I actually, Elaine, I've got a one thought on that for you. On as far as dealing with, denialists, creating policy change in red states. Pew actually, I was shocked when one of their tactics that surprised me, for instance, with the flood prepared communities program, which of course, that's climate, sea level rise, stronger storms, hurricanes, losing your beaches, losing your coast, and God, you're talking about an impact on your local economy, people, houses, infrastructure. I mean, all these things. That's talk about climate impacts and making people care. The way they did it at Pew, and I have to say it worked, because it worked in South Carolina, for instance, or at least back, when I was working with the team, they made a lot of headway by literally not using the word climate change.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I mean, at first I'm like, and I remember I was editing a brief, I was editing something, and I was like, and I kept inserting it, and they're like, no. So I had this long conversation with the team lead, this executive director is like, what? And she explained to me, she's like, and this is, now through my graduate degree, we've talked about this subsequently too, in our own tactics, but at the community level. But yes, I mean, they said, no, because you will lose them instantly.
So what did you use instead?
So what they did was, and I hear you, Rhonda, I completely hear you on, on politicians, polls, and, what's going to move them. And I'm with you 100%. They do care about how their constituents see them and messaging, and they care about getting reelected, right? And so, and who are the stakeholders? I hate that word. Who matters on that end, right? So first, at Pew, how did they do it? Well, and the economic argument on that end has influenced a lot of lawmakers. It wasn't the only one, but one of the things they pointed out, and it's sort of twofold. They're threefold. One, really fine-tuned economic impact things. If you do X, then Y. if you do this flood mitigation, I hate that word, but whatever, you know, let's curb your flood risk by doing specifically da 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 da. And then they could show, here's the data, not just here's, but here's the numbers. If you do nothing, and they are, and again, not using the word climate change, but like but showing a downscale projection in such a way that that's difficult to do. But be able to show in other places where find the examples of places that have lost even more coastline than you have. Show what happened. Show how it impacted, how it had hurt. I hate that, another word I'm hating these days, impact. Show how it damaged, hurt local economy and people who lost their lives. And forecast, blah, blah, blah. At the same time, give them lots of tools, specific tools, and how they can put them in place in a cost-effective, easy way that's tangible. And as we literally created 13 briefs showing, city X did this, city Y did this, and it was broken down by like 3 themes on climate mitigation. It's boring, it can be really boring stuff.
But mitigation is one thing. I mean, if you use one example of a house, it's like they did mitigation, but the fact of the matter is State Farm is no longer insuring homes. So not only are you not going to be able to build back, but your biggest asset in your life will not be insured. So that's going to hit people. They're going to get that, right?
Oh yeah, no, it 100%, and that is influencing folks. Like, oh Jesus, yeah, oh my God, I can't insure my home. But we would also point out, well, and it's still evolving, and it needs a lot of more reform. But for instance, without getting technical, the National Flood Insurance Program, it rewards communities that take measures to curb risk, and that includes, incentivizing people to move inland. For instance, it includes, one of the big, in my field and my specialty, climate adaptation, one of the biggest elephants in the room right now, as you can imagine, is, we're trying to change the language around it, is managed retreat. We're Americans, we never retreat. There's just that phrase. People just, it just repels people. But we can show, okay, well, you can get more assistance, you can get, and down to the individual homeowner level, if you, at least, for instance, if you raise your home, and that doesn't mean it's going to withstand everything, but in some areas it does make a difference. So you can affect literally your own insurance rate by taking XYZ different measures, and at the end of the day, some of them, I can tell you, I know what the sea level rise projections are for certain areas, and a lot of people are like, no, sorry, Miami, all kinds. It's going to be gone at a certain, it will be.
Yeah.
But aren't we all at risk every time there's a hurricane, a natural disaster, a fire? All our home insurance rates go up. It's not just those in the affected areas. And then people complain, why did my rates go up? Well, we're a community, a national community, and we all share it in the cost of premiums going up. So it's affecting, and not only that, our taxes go towards rescue and towards, all the disasters and saving lives and all of that. So we're all paying for it.
Yeah. We're paying for crisis instead of prevention.
Yeah. But isn't that the way human nature is? How do we overcome that? Be more strategic and stop being more reactive. It's like, I've been saying that my whole career when talking about marketing. Have a good marketing strategy and don't react, and then you make all these mistakes. It's the same thing with everything.
There's a couple of photojournalists that recently moved here from Florida because they know what's going to be happening to the water resources in Florida. He's like, most people don't understand. And they were like, why are you moving to Arizona? Aren't you worried about the heat? And he goes, I'd rather be here than there with what's going on. Yeah. And they're they're big composters. So they're part of that. That's how I kind of met them.
And I just ask a fast question again of Anne. Sure. And when you presented the data, because a lot of people just turn off to data, and especially if they're science, pessimists. How did you present it in a way that actually got their attention and got them to listen and believe the data?
Using journalism tactics. Working with I mean, they had already incorporated a lot, and Pew has an amazing editorial team, but it was literally like, start with the really tangible, go down to this one example of this community, this one person who lost and then boom, and then you balloon out, and then in your place, blah, 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 and this will, and then
Right.
it up, but also, bringing in images, videos, images. I mean, you don't want to terrify people, but it's reality, right? So that's one thing. I was also going to say, just going back to but that combined with, Pew does op-eds also, for instance. So it rewards lawmakers that take certain actions and say, look, you did, it does that, it worked. This is also like a lot of, like, for instance, what Rhonda's doing. I mean, there's the briefs that I worked on back when I was working at Pew were combined with really savvy, seasoned folks who had used to work on the Hill for whatever, and lobbying, and testifying, and they would find, they would find the sympathetic lawmakers, and who would, give them the like what people do on the other side, give them the language in a bill, and then go testify about it, and then go try to gather, more support. But I also got to say, another facet of what Pew does is trying to fight any battle on your own, of course, is extremely difficult. So Pew works in coalitions on many issues. So it's, out in the Western US, various programs, or they try to conserve resources or work with people on different things. They would be part of Pew is a member of certain Western coalitions on different issues, because we're stronger working with other partners than our own. So to go back to the local level, one of my courses in my degree was literally, how do you, and again, a phrase I hate, stakeholders. We power mapped issues. And I think we were literally writing, term papers on this, like, who has the most power? What are the levers of influence? How do you engage, get the local communities, and other people, how does Issue Act affect different groups of people? And then analyzing those groups of people, to try to pull them in and engage with them on this issue, to also apply pressure. And so that, I'm like, what, even as a journalist, I'm like, I've never heard that phrase. What's power mapping? Well, God, now I'm on the other side. When I see some of the way, and issues like, for instance, in Cancer Alley in the South, and how different coalitions were formed. We studied, how their tactics. How do you go up against a massive corporation and an issue? How do you pressure?
That would be a fascinating thing to talk about, power mapping. And I think one thing women are realizing is that they've got more power, and they're learning how to use their voice this year, with rights being taken away, and just going, so that would be an interesting conversation. If you don't mind, I would like to sort of wrap up the recording, but if any of you want to stay, and Anne especially, I want to brainstorm an idea with you, if you don't mind. But Elaine, you as a board member would be awesome too, and Millie can stay too, because you might be interested. But anyway, if you don't mind that. So thank you, Anne, for being part of our Community Commons session. We really appreciate you and everybody who's joined us today. And we look forward to all the change making that all of us can do into the future. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.